The seminars program for the Aspen Institute, and it's a real pleasure and privilege to be with you for this panel on China. China is no one thing. We have very distinguished panelists, a set of panelists who write both fiction and nonfiction, and I'll introduce them briefly. And then we'll really strive for a conversation rather than a series of serial speeches. About 10 or 6:15, we'll want to have participation from the audience, so please be generous with your questions, but relatively brief with them. On my left is Deborah Fallows. She has a PhD in linguistics from the University of Texas at Austin and has written widely in the Atlantic Monthly, National Geographic, the LA Times Magazine, Newsweek, and many other publications. Most recently, she's published her book, Dreaming in Chinese. To her left is James Fallows, who's a national correspondent for The Atlantic. Not immediately to her left. He's a finalist for the National Magazine Award 5 times and won it once. He won the American Book Award for nonfiction and most recently wrote China Airborne. And he's a fellow Rhodes Scholar, I'm happy to say. In between the two of them is Lisa C., who's the author of New York Times bestsellers Snowflower and the Secret Fan, Peony in Love, Shanghai Girls, and most recently Dreams of Joy. She also wrote the libretto for the Los Angeles Opera based on Gold Mountain and was honored as National Woman of the Year by the Organization of Chinese American Women in 2001 and was the recipient of the Chinese American Museum History Makers Award in the fall of 2003. At the very far end, just to keep things very interesting, is Sandra Tsing, who's a writer and performer, whose previous books include A Year in Van Nuys, Depth Takes a Holiday, If You Lived Here, You'd Be Home by Now, and Aliens in America, and most recently Mother on Fire. She's a regular commentator on NPR's Morning Edition and PRI's Marketplace, and Ira Glass's This American Life. Her awards include the Pushcart Prize in Fiction and 2 National Magazine Award nominations for her work as a contributing editor for The Atlantic Monthly. And last but not least is Yiyun, who grew up in Beijing and came to the United States in 1996. Her stories and essays have been published in The New Yorker, the Best American Short Stories, O. Henry Prize Stories, and elsewhere. She won the Frank O'Connor International Short Story Award, the Penn Hemingway Award, the Guardian First Book Award, and is a 2010 MacArthur Fellow. Welcome to all of you, and thanks very much for being here. We thought we'd start by taking this opportunity to reflect a little bit on how you became writers, but particularly how you became writers about China. Why China? And we'll avoid going in order down the row, which is why I mixed things up a bit. So who wants to start? Why China? Sandra.
I'm warmed up from the other panel. I'll start. And
Great.
Tsunami can speak back. I never wanted to write about China. It was the last thing I wanted to write about. And the reason I grew up like Chinese German, and as I related the other panel, I'm not going to repeat that. And my father was just this eccentric Chinese guy who was threatening to overtake all of my work. And it was sort of, and also I knew at this particular time, it was kind of in the 80s, Asian American writing was really in. Amy Tan had just done the Joy Luck Club, and Maxine Hong Kingston had done the Wounded Warrior, and it was kind of like, and I remember Sandy Dykstra is a big agent of Asian American writers, and she was meeting with me and said, now you have to write an Asian American thing, and I go, no, I don't want to. So, and there, I perceived it as a genre where there'd always be, the grandmother would say something wise, and there would be ghosts over, cemeteries and incense sticks, and there were always these tropes of writing Asian American literature. So it was like the last thing I wanted to do. But in fact, sort of coming into my own was partly beginning to write about my father in my own terms, and in terms of using Chinese, not in sort of an Oriental, fetishized Asian American thing, but to write about it from the perspective of sort of an annoying Asian father who has many annoying habits, like eating out of dumpsters and drinking Starbucks coffee that people left behind and pouring it together and drinking it on his own and saying, well, that's what the Chinese do. But in fact, no. Like Chinese relatives go like, no Chinese people do that. That's gross. So I think that he always used, I wanted to pony it up as something playful, and it wasn't politically correct, and then actually I learned I feel more Chinese in my middle age now. I always think there's an abacus clacking in my mind. It's like one of the organs in my body. That's kind of like what my dad was like. So I'm kind of like becoming more okay with it. So that's sort of how I came to it.
Is it kind of an excavation of your own identity in a way, or no?
Yeah, it is. And in terms of what you think, just accepting certain things about yourself. And I think when I began as a younger writer, it's just I wanted to say, no, this is who I am, and I'm very interesting, and my parents are not interesting. But in the end, it's kind of, I think when you get more middle age, it's kind of accepting that, for me, my journey now that I'm a parent is accepting that I'm like a parent, and that's okay. I'm more like them.
Does that ring true of other experiences at all?
I would say it's different for me. Why do I write about China? It's very strange. Actually, I never thought I would write about China. I thought I would write about people. And people I knew when I started writing happened to be Chinese people. And I think there still are a group of people or characters that I'm very interested in. They're oftentimes, people on the edge. They're not, the center of the society, but they live. This is how I look at China. And if you look at America or any other country, it will be the same. There are always characters who really live seriously and who want to have a serious life, want to feel, serious emotions, and want to make serious connections with the world. But, whether it's fate or chance, things happen to them, and they have, things break down, and their lives do not turn out as they imagined. And I like those stories. But you see those stories in China almost all the time.
So in writing about them, what did you learn about yourself?
What did I learn about
yourself?
myself?
Yeah.
I learned that I don't like writing about myself. So I'm completely absent in my writing, which is good, because in writing you want to get out of your skin and you want to try to imagine other people. And I like to write about, say, older people, because I don't know how it feels to be old. And so I would like to imagine how it feels to be old and cross the street when all these cars in Beijing street, they don't stop for you and they rush by. And how does it feel, if you are, a beggar in the street in Beijing? Those things, I like to imagine those things. So I think it's more just to understand not only Beijing or China, but also just the world. Yeah.
Human beings.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go next, because I feel like I sort of fit in with this group down at that end. We could switch still. So I had actually been writing for a long time. I'd worked as a journalist for a long time. But when I started my first book, which is about the Chinese side of my family, I still hadn't gone to China yet. And my husband was doing a lot of business in China, and this was in 1988. And we happened to be in Hong Kong, and we decided for one day to take a train trip up to Guangzhou just for the day and come back. Okay, I have to stop and backtrack. I already messed up this story. It's a good thing I'm not a writer. Okay, so when I was growing up, although my parents weren't, the family, they weren't looking for Starbucks, they were looking for other things. So if my grandfather was driving and he saw some used electrical conduit by the side of the road, he'd stop and pick it up, because you can never have too much used electrical conduit. Old motors, he'd stop, pick them up. They kept every 5-gallon soy sauce container, turn them into those waste bin kind. What do you call that? Where you sweep into it?
Dustpans.
Dustpans. Anything that was, somebody didn't tie down, they would pick up. My dad, for years and years and years and years, only wore Zoris. He had to rent a pair of shoes for my wedding. But there was one day he was driving and he saw a pair of moon boots someone had discarded by the side of the road, stopped and picked those up, and he's still wearing them. So my family, they had these really beautiful gardens filled with cymbidiums and bodhi trees, and all this, they were very lush and very tropical, but they also had all that junk that people had been picking up. I mean, just tons and tons and tons of junk. And I thought, that's how everyone lives. And I got a little older, and I went to kindergarten, and I started going to people's houses, and they had things like lawns and roses, and I thought, oh man, those people are weird. And then I got a little older, and I realized, no, those people aren't weird. It's actually my family that's quite weird. Okay, jump ahead to that train trip. Right when we crossed over the border into mainland China, looking out the window, built right up to the train tracks were the houses of the poorest of the poor. And looking down into these little tiny courtyards were the gardens that I had grown up with, filled with all of this junk, but also very pretty. And I realized that even though it had been 100 and some years since my great-great-grandfather had come here to work on the railroad, that we were at heart still South China peasants. We still had that frugality. We still had that sort of visual aesthetic that, yes, maybe we didn't look as Chinese as we did, and I should say that in Los Angeles I have about 400 relatives, of which there are about a dozen that look like me, and the majority are still full Chinese, and then this little spectrum in between. So I'm the odd one out. But we may have looked a little different. Some of us may have lost our Chinese. Some of us may have become much more educated, but still at heart, we were South China peasants, and it was really in our blood. And so then, as I was writing what was it? On Gold Mountain, I could really go to that place and really understand not just my family, but myself in a very different way.
Jim, Deb, how do you think about this coming more from the outside?
So I can talk next. I'm the outlier here. I'm a journalist. I've never consciously written fiction. I may have unconsciously done it from time to time, but I found being immersed in China has been really fascinating. I wanted to say something about the aesthetic of hoarding, which there are some universal traits. Deb and I, when our kids were little, we lived in Japan for a couple of years. This was in the late 1980s, when to be in Japan as an American was to get poorer every single day. The yen was doubling in value against the dollar. We were living there. We used to have our kids just sort of share an apple very carefully. It was the 1930s aesthetic for American kids in the 1980s. And after a while, we realized a wonderful thing, which is showing commonality of modern Americans, your ancestors. We realized that the freakishly neat aesthetic of modern Japanese families was such that anything that was a year or two old, they would throw out. And once a month on the streets in our neighborhood in Yokohama, they had the so-called Sodaigomi Day, which was large bulk garbage. And so I would be out there wrestling with these Japanese winos for TVs, for Barca loungers, rice cookers. I brought home a barbecue one time. It was great. So I think that the spirit that was there 100 years ago and you saw in Guangzhou, it lives in modern Americans too.
I have a feeling you're going to end up in a character in one of these novels.
But I did have this somewhat bleak moment, which I did in my next story about, where I found myself wrestling with a 75-year-old overcoat-wearing, probably World War II veteran Japanese wino for a sofa. And I won because he was disabled, but still I thought I've come to a difficult pass. Let me bring this back to China. In the 30-plus years I've worked for The Atlantic now, I felt very, very fortunate to be able just to be immersed in lots of different parts of the world. I spent part of my time working on American economics and politics, and the other part around the world. And Deb and I and our then very little kids went to China first in 1986 when we were living in Japan, and that was a whole bizarre episode when we were delegates to the World Esperanto Convention in Beijing, because that's how we could get visas as journalists. But as China loomed more and more in the consciousness of the world over the intervening 15 or 20 years, I realized I didn't know as much about it as I would like to. So 7 years ago, right after the Aspen Ideas Festival 7 years ago, we moved directly over there. We were in Shanghai. We were in Shanghai for about a year and a half. We were in Beijing for about a year and a half. Traveled to almost every province or region except Tibet, where we couldn't get visas, and one or two others. And what became there was a consumer virtue for a journalist of being in China, and then a producer virtue. The consumer virtue was every single day you would see something where you just hadn't imagined the day before. And sometimes it was horrible, but we'd always talk around the dinner table each night saying it's always been more interesting than horrible. Even when, I think our low point was when we came out of the subway one January night in Beijing, and it was unbelievably cold and polluted, but they built a subway near our apartment. And as we came out of the subway, we saw a rat eating a pool of frozen vomit outside a karaoke bar. And we thought we maybe are hitting bottom here with a rat eating frozen vomit. But still, it was even then it was more interesting. So it was interesting to see things, and that's kind of the tales I got to tell in the magazine and books. The producer benefit of it was I ended up thinking China was a place that Americans needed to have a basically different mental picture of, which I'll just summarize this way. I don't know any foreigners living in China who are afraid of China. Everybody's interested in it, they like things, they dislike other things, but nobody is afraid of it. And many, many Americans seem afraid of it. So finding ways to convey the message of take this place seriously without being afraid of it, that's what I found engaging.
Well, first I have to answer Yiyun's question to say, I actually know what it feels like to be old trying to cross the street in Beijing, because I did that every day for a year and a half. And in some it is terrifying. And actually, I can tell you the whole story later, but I nearly didn't return from China one day after trying to cross the street in Beijing. So I'm just really happy to be here, right, after I got hit by a motorcycle, which was incidentally going the wrong way, going against traffic on a 9-lane one-way section of the highway where I was, trustingly crossing with a green light, and he came and hit me from the other direction when I was looking. At any rate, I'm here. But so I kind of have a different answer about both writing and writing about China from other people. Whenever I've written anything, it's been nonfiction, and the reason I've ever written anything was because I had a problem or an issue that I needed to work out for myself that was, for me personally, a big deal issue. The first thing was probably when our kids were, just to show how this mother-life balance topic that's so much in the news now keeps circling around. This was very big in my life in 1980 when our second son was born, and I just, for myself, had to work out the issues of working and motherhood and get through it. So that's when I actually first started writing. So to me, it's been just something that I couldn't not do. I had to do it, the writing, to just kind of explain things to myself as therapy as much as anything else. But when we went to China, it, in a way, was the same thing. It was survival for me, because the things that everybody's talking about of how different life is and how overwhelming and confusing and chaotic was something that I felt was just going to bury me alive unless I had a way into understanding the puzzles and the enigmas and the chaos that I was meeting every day in our life in China. So to me, trying to write through that was completely my survival and changed not only being able to live there, but being able to thrive there. So
a way of making sense to yourself about what you were experiencing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I guess just to elaborate a little bit more, one thing I found from all of our expat friends who were also in China and incidentally also feeling as overwhelmed, it wasn't just me, was that those who did the best in finding their way in China was ones who used whatever their passion was to help explain to them what they were seeing. And for me, that was the language. Mm-hmm. Studying the language was something that I just dived into the deep end and tried to do every single day for the 3 years we were there. And using the language as my vehicle to interpret the things that I saw that were surprising or poignant or depressing or exhilarating in China using the language as a starting point to explain those things was how I used my passion to help me get through, and others used maybe food or textiles or martial arts or music or many other things. But it's a tiny way into a very big situation.
So if I can follow up on that, to the extent that you go back and forth between languages, is there a difference between the literary imagination in Chinese as distinct from writing in English?
Here's the right. Well, I grew up in China. Of course, my mother tongue is Chinese, and I always say I don't write in Chinese. I've never written in Chinese, and I came to this country to be a scientist, and I almost got my PhD in immunology, and I switched to writing. So,
do you want to say a little bit about how that happened? You've sort of let it dangle there.
How did that happen? I just landed in Iowa City, Iowa, to study immunology, and if you know,
there happened to be a workshop.
There happened, yeah. Everybody, when I went in town, somebody told me everybody in town is writing a novel. I'm sure this was a joke, but I believed this person, so I thought I would write a novel too. And so I became a writer there. So, but I guess coming back to the language, English is my first language in writing, and it's the language I process, thinking about writing and about fiction or literature. It's very interesting how I don't think I can write about China in Chinese in a way. I explain that's because my mother doesn't read English, and so it's very convenient. But also, I feel that, of course, when you came into a language as a grown-up, you lost a lot of intimacy with the language, but you also gained a lot of, knowledge. I'm sure, Deb, you would understand that, because you came into the languages, with a different intellectual setup. I'm very happy about using English, and I still calculate. I still do my math in Chinese. That's about the only thing I do in Chinese now. Everything else is in English.
Because I feel very unconfident about this question, I just really want to jump in about what Chineseness is. And it's kind of like, I feel, and it's like, to me, I was fascinated with Pearl S. Buck. Like, early in China, those were some of my favorite books on the planet, because I think that she gets it. And I think sort of the way kind of the first mother, the second mother, the third mother, and all that kind of negotiation feels real to me, having lived with a Chinese father, but never having lived there then. And I also remember when the Joy Luck Club came out, by Amy Tan's thing, I had all these women friends saying, you must get the Joy Luck Club, I'm giving it to you, this is yours, and they were all Jewish. So apparently the Joy Luck Club is about Jewish mothers. I thought it was a great book, but I didn't relate to it at all because I had a German mother and not a Chinese father, so I didn't even know what that book was about. So I think there's a lot of different ways to parse this stuff, and the only thing I'll say is I also got my BS in physics before going into writing, so it's the same career path of kind of going out of that. And the only other thing I'll say before tossing it back, going back to kind of the fear, why people fear China and being a mother, is I think some of the things flying around now are kind of like the whole tiger mom phenomenon was a huge China is here. That's why people no, China isn't there, it is here, it is your children, your lazy white children against these perfect, amazing Chinese children who are kind of playing the piano 17 hours a day and biting the piano and playing the violin and beating other kids at school. So I think there's a lot at play in terms of China versus the U.S. versus Chinese women, Chinese kids here or there, and I think that's why it's a really big and interesting question. And I sort of wish I tiger mommed my kids more, but no, down the back.
Too late. Yeah. Jim, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say something which is not so much literary linguistic, but the something that Deb and I loved all the time in China. You were saying, well, you heard everybody was writing a novel, you thought you would do it too. And that kind of thing, just every day, we'd find people in China just thinking, okay, I'm going to build a moon rocket launch station in my backyard, or I have a cement plant, why shouldn't I also have a winery? And it was, and a lot of these things were crazy. but there was something just so cheering about the sense that you could do anything. And I think that what may seem intimidating, fearsome, tiger momish, instead struck us often as just charming and human and vivid. And actually, the Atlantic a couple of weeks ago had it on its site, pictures of these wacky Chinese do-it-yourself projects, like a guy who built his own airplane with a piano inside of it. One of the things that I did in my first month in China, I was working, it's a long story, as a ferry pilot there and bringing an airplane down to the Zhuhai Air Show, and then taking off, we saw a replica of the Palace of Versailles and also the Pyramid of Egypt made out of golden glass. And I thought, what the hell? And it's a guy who runs an air conditioning company who wants to save the world environmentally and doing it. And it's just, there's things about that, it's just so human. As you were saying, I might as well write a novel too, even though I'm an immunologist.
Everyone's doing it.
Yeah.
If I can take this in a related direction, I've not been to China, but we have had Chinese participants at Aspen seminars, and we had 2 Chinese journalists whom I met in March. And so over dinner, I asked them, what is the Chinese dream? And they said, to live like Americans. And then they turned the question around and said, what is the American dream? Which I'm a moderator, so I'm not supposed to get asked questions. And I said, the American dream now is to use Chinese money to buy Chinese goods, which they thought was very funny. But it made me think about these comparative experiences. What is the Chinese dream? And what is it that you've learned about contemporary America by going back and forth between the 2 countries, intellectually, culturally, in a literary fashion? What does China have to teach us about ourselves?
I'm going to answer that first, and maybe
Okay.
not exactly to your question, because my book is named Dreaming in Chinese, so I think I have
I
it
was
right,
hoping
but-
you would. Yeah.
And it was called Dreaming in Chinese because, the reference to when you dream in another language, you think that you're fluent in that language. But really, the second reason that I think is more important of the title of that book is that I was astonished, we were astonished that this idea of your dream, my dream is to do this, my dream is to do that, came up daily in conversations that we would have with Chinese people. It was just a big factor of life to have a dream. And something we talked about a lot, like why would people always be talking about what their dream is? And one of the answers that we came up with, I think, was that this is the first time in a very long time, maybe ever, that Chinese people have felt that they could have a dream, that a dream was attainable to them. And it could be any wacky dream that you wanted it to be, and you could probably get there. That we saw a lot of people get there out of nowhere. But I'm not sure that I agree that it is to live like Americans. I felt we were kind of, culturally, America's interesting to China, but it was very comfortable to live as an American in China because nobody really cared about us. Nobody was really that interested in us, unlike when you're in Japan, certainly, or in a lot of other countries where you feel you're going around with a placard saying, I'm American, just hit me now. The Chinese weren't really that interested in us. And I think that the Chinese dream that I saw was there were 1.3 billion Chinese dreams. Everybody had a dream of something that they wanted to do. And that was coupled with this intense feeling like, of course I can get there. We want to start a company. You don't even need a business plan. You just go try it. And sometimes it works, and if it doesn't, then you just go try something else. It was both inspiring and humbling, I would say. Yeah.
But I want to just respond to that question. I think, I have noticed there are a group of Chinese who actually really want to have an American life. And these are the Chinese, like my generation, like my friends, they have done really well in China, but they want their children to leave China in whatever way they can. They want their children to go to come to America. One is the pollution. They can't trust the air. If you're breathing that air in, your children are, going to be in danger. 2, the food, they cannot trust the food quality. And 3rd, I think I'm not sure, how it's still very, very palpable that the people don't trust the government in the way they think any moment they're going to take our money away from us. So the best way is to get our children to America. So they send their children, to boarding schools in America, and they find, hosting families. So in a way, they want to. It's very much like how my father moved from countryside to Beijing. So and then I moved from Beijing to America. It's very much like the same migration. This is the generation I thought was very interesting. They may not care about themselves, but they want their children to be in America.
And where Sandra and I live in Los Angeles, there are these houses where people come to have babies. They come and they stay there, and so that their babies will be born as American citizens. And of course, so many children who are sent over not to boarding schools, but just sent by themselves as high school students, and just live in Los Angeles, sort of 15 to 18 years old by themselves on their own, but trying to establish this American life. But I wanted to say, I don't know if any of you saw that article just Sunday in the New York Times about these new big high-rises, high-rises going up in China all the time. But these the whole point of these is to get 250 million people to move from the countryside, from their rural life of farming, into these high-rise buildings. And so you could say, well, maybe that's a good thing, because now you're not doing that backbreaking, really hard work, and you don't live a very long life with that, and it really is very hand-to-mouth. But what are those people going to do once they get there? And I thought that there was a very good point in that article that, this is a government program that's on such a vast scale, very much like what happened during the Great Leap Forward, where it seems like it has the possibility to improve society, but nobody really knows what the effect of something like that would be. And if you think about, what is it, at the end of this process, they will now have more people in urban areas than we have as a total population as America, as United States. So what does that mean? And I don't know what that means for us about writing here, but it is something that I think relates to this sort of topic.
This is very far from literature, so I'll make it brief. The urbanization is interesting, but it's also an extrapolation of what the last 25 years have been. There are these gigantic, Shenzhen, where I've spent a lot of time, is this incredible place. Now, 17 or 18 million people after hardly existed 30 years ago. But I think a main point on what you were saying about the doubts people have about China's future. We're so accustomed to the Chinese leadership being able to surmount all the obstacles ahead of it that is really something that's been impressive for 30 years. But the problems ahead are grave, I think, for that country. And we're used to thinking of America as being unable to cope with its problems, and our problems are trivial compared to theirs.
Corruption is just tremendous and scary, too.
But so back to the other part of the question, are there things in particular that working on Chinese subjects have taught you about the United States?
I will volunteer my outlier role again. When I first came back to the U.S., when we came back after a couple of years in China, I did a big story for the Atlantic, essentially on the topic of whether America is going to hell when you compare it with China. And I ended up thinking there really is only one way in which we need, if you look at other parts of the world, to feel anxious about the United States, and that's the actual structure of our government. Our structure of our government is the only part of American institutions that has not been constantly remade over 200 plus years, and that is actually worrisome. But everything else, I think, has resiliency, and I feel more that way after living in China than before.
Well, I also had written this piece in the Atlantic about my dad, my 92-year-old Chinese dad. And I think going back there, although, there are a lot of layers to this, because I think there's a lot of ways that we romanticize China also, and then you get there and you go, well, that's not really true at all. But I think the idea, and I certainly was struggling with my dad, who's very cantankerous, and he should be in assisted living, but he insists on living at home, so we have a full-time Filipino male nurse taking care of him. Tens of thousands of dollars are going on. I mean, it's really a difficult problem that many solve. But I realized also that I also have the freedom to go home every day, because I haven't had to move him, diapers and all, into my home, which would have been more of a Chinese value of the older people get, the more you revere them, and they're wise and they live together. But although that can be, I think that's something that one can venerate as an Asian and Chinese value, but which may or may not be true all the time, but certainly that would be culturally more, and I was thinking about that are, we're so split apart now, and the generations are so different. Thank God, but I don't know.
So we were talking just before we came up here about this question of home, and this may be differently relevant for Jim and Deb, but where is home for you all existentially as you think about these in-between categories that you live in? And this may be directly related also to your identity as writers, but where's home?
Well, I can start, and then we can kind of roll down that way. I mean, like I said, it kind of travels. My home used to be like, thank God it's not our house in Malibu where my dad still lives, 1963, has never updated anything. Cracked glass shower stalls are repaired with duct tape, and kind of like there's chipped beakers on the stove full of green tea, and like a toilet is being used as a planter, and you just don't even want to know, it's not been updated. So but then again, as I go, but I think that's just part of, I'm 51 now, sort of the sentimentalization of life, where I kind of go, actually, I think that was not home, but now I think there's part of it, and part of the familiarity of my dad's eccentricity, and of his many eccentric things. He, for years put a lot of money in my name. I didn't know it. So the IRS would just send me every year, you made, X amount of money and interest, so you owe interest, because he thought it would be more appropriate for me to pay the interest on his investments, whatever. Great circle of life. But the more that I think, and in fact, at one point, he even had a bunch of checking accounts, which is funny, which have 7 names on the checking account, and they're Shishang, Yushi. I mean, half of the people on the checking account are kind of mothers-in-laws of his 3 ex-wives, and some are actually dead, and they're in China somewhere, so you can't find them. So 7 people have to sign off on these checks, and only he knows where they are and what cereal box they're in, and there's no online thing to get them. And so for a while it was kind of a really hellacious thing about lies, and then I realized how really secure it is. So, kind of like I have my password stolen online, and I go, that's actually a very good system, because if nobody knows the checks, and he has the paper checks, who's ever going to cash that? They can't. You literally can't. So I think, and that's just kind of the sentimental circling back of I go, yeah, you're a smart guy, Dad. So that it starts to feel a bit more home again to me, that house, which is one that I really wanted to escape for many years. So I think it kind of...
Has that changed as you've gone through your divorce, which is something you've also written about?
Yeah. I mean, I got divorced. Like, where is my home? Was it here? Was it my new place that I bought? And then I see kind of like what I left behind in my marriage that really was working. I used to say kind of like my husband would like fix the shelves and nothing else, wouldn't talk to you. So now it's kind of like, well, I have someone to talk to me, but who's going to fix the shelves? That kind of thing. So it's a little bit of an unstable. Not unstable, but it's kind of like a ruminating, where am I exactly? But I think, and then the older you get, if you have only one living parent, even though they've been kind of a bastard much of the time, you go, well, when he's gone, then I won't have a dad. So I think it's sort of sentimental, and it varies for me.
Yeah. You said that you no longer speak of going back to China.
Right. When I first came here, we always say, let's go back to China to see our parents. And 6-7 years into our American life, we stopped saying, let's go back to China. Let's go visit China. And so that home, this sense of home was gone from China. I was thinking, actually, my children were swimming in the pool earlier, and I said, okay, time to go home. I meant time to go back to the room. But I always, wherever I go, I say time to go home. I think that's, when you ask where is home, I don't know, because I came to this country with 2 big suitcases. And every day I look at my house and thought, how can I fit these 2 things back to those 2 suitcases? Can't. But I think, for me, I guess I build that home mostly for my children, so they can have a sense of home. Because for them, it's very important. They have a house, up the hill. They have those are theirs. For me, myself, I don't mind not having a sense of home. You can always go to another place. I think that's part of the immigrant experience too. that you can always go up and move to another place, start a new job. Sometimes I think, I should, stop writing and do something else. Just reinvent yourself all the time.
I grew up in a small town in Southern California, Redlands. That's where I'm from, and I'll always be from there. So we can talk about this later. Which street? So it's a small town. We would know each other. We've lived in Washington, D.C. for half the time since I got out of graduate school. So we live in D.C. But the main way I think of myself from all the time we've lived around the world is I am an American. That's my main self-identity, just by contrast with every place else we've lived.
So for me, I'd have to say Los Angeles, Chinatown. My great-grandparents arrived there in 1895. My great-grandfather was the godfather of Los Angeles, Chinatown. Patriarch, maybe a better word. So my family has been there well over 100 years. And so and Chinatown has moved around a lot, but my family still has businesses there, and some people still live there. And yes, it's changed tremendously, but as a child, I moved around a lot with my mother and her various husbands, but Chinatown was the touchstone. That was the place that I always returned. And so to me, I think when I go to China, and I'm not very interested in the big cities, to be frank, but when I go out into these small villages out in the countryside, and there was one place where I was told I was only the second foreigner ever to go there. By my count, I was actually the fifth, but only the second Caucasian-looking foreigner. And to me, it's just kind of like a bigger Chinatown, and I get it. I have this kind of understanding of it. And when I'm here, and one of the interesting things that happens when you become more successful as a writer is they send you out on these bigger and bigger book tours. And so I have seen now a lot of America, which I didn't see as a girl. And I look like I belong, and people think I'm in the know, but I'm not in that know. And there are a lot of things I don't understand when I'm in a place like Kansas City or Memphis or, I don't know, Wichita. I mean, these places that I'm sent, and it's like I just don't get it. And so for me, I would say Los Angeles, Chinatown, and you mentioned a couple of nice honors that I had, but actually my two biggest honors out of my whole career were once I got to be a judge for the Miss Chinatown pageant, and then 2 years ago I was the Grand Marshal of the Chinatown New Year's Parade.
Wow. Deb, and then we'll take some questions from the audience.
Okay, well, I think I'm actually Chinese, and
I think so too.
I discovered that after, well, in a way, the first time we went to China, even though this was 25, 30 years ago, even though it was all so alien and so overwhelming, I felt really safe and at home there. And after we had lived in China for a number of years, I was so surprised to feel such a deep kinship with Chinese women. Like, we just got along. Even if we couldn't talk to each other very well, I felt I knew them, and in my soul, we were the same. It was probably more because of the Chinese women than it was because of it was an illusion to me, perhaps. But they are, even these ones who dream big dreams, start big companies, are very successful. They're totally unpretentious and completely warm instantly, I found.
Also very tough.
But very tough, yes. And so when we did a genome test with the National Geographic recently, where you can track your genome, and mine, it was very reassuring because it was 44% Central European, which is really all of my grandparents were immigrants from Czechoslovakia, from Bohemia, so that was kind of the explanation. But it was also the 36% Central Asian, which was kind of pushing over a little bit toward. I thought, yes, of course, that this is some explanation for why ridiculously, I feel Chinese. And I think there's just something in the spirit of China, everything from the medicine to the way you prepare your food to the way you are warm with people and feel part of their family, and the lack of pretensions that I just love. So my home, if I had to move away or could move away somewhere again, I probably wouldn't live in China forever, but I would feel comfortable there.
Thank you. So we'll take a couple of questions and wrap up a little after 6:25, please. There's a microphone coming. Yeah. To your right.
What is the status of religion in China today?
What's the status of religion?
Well, I don't have the statistics, but it seems to me in the past 20 years, there's this, growth of Christianity in China, which to me is very interesting because the Catholic Church used to be the Chinese Catholic Patriotic Association, which was run by the government. But now it's much more.
There's still that tension.
There's still the tension between the Chinese Catholic Church and Rome, but it seems a lot more. I mean, it's much more relaxed. So you can, be religious. When we grew up, you could not write your religion. You could not be religious. And I remember I had this classmate who was raised Catholic, and it was very difficult for her at school, and because of that.
It's a side answer to this question. I'm just reflecting because my granduncle just died recently, and so it was an interesting thing of having a Chinese family do a funeral in Southern California, and and it was at Forest Lawn, which is so, to me, artificial and bizarre. If you had that sort of burial, it's sort of a commercial chain, and so kind of like the first day was kind of the open casket viewing with some Buddhist things around it, and then the PowerPoint of kind of like the photos coming, and then the second day it was the cremation, and it's kind of like the little picnic chairs set in front of the grave, and then they threw it in, and then a truck came with a tamping tool going. I don't know the dirt of it. Well, everybody, the whole Chinese family watched and had the Forest Lawn guy, say, well, where are you going to put the numbers? And to me, it was just this fascinating. There was some of the Buddhist thing, and then some just, Forest Lawn garden machinery, and so it was sort of interesting, and not being just how people they're transitioning.
And one thing we saw in the past, when we were in Shanghai in the last few years, was the rebuilding of both the Jewish synagogue in the ghetto in Shanghai and the Catholic cathedral in Shanghai that is getting entirely new stained glass windows of kind of traditional Catholic themes, but done with a Chinese aesthetic and sensibility. So that both of those were allowed to happen and were done with great gusto and care and financial backing is very interesting.
There's one further dimension. Again, my knowledge is secondhand, but participants from China have said that there's a deliberate reintroduction of certain elements of Confucianism by the government in a recognition that the doctrines of the Communist Party are no longer strong enough to hold the society together, but certain elements of Confucian filial piety and social solidarity are now being introduced systematically as a way of cultural cohesion. Other questions, please, back. The microphone's closer here, and then we'll come back to you.
This is a question for the Barbara and James. I've totally enjoyed Deborah's book with the language, and James I've read you continuously, and it's really heartwarming to feel that you are so comfortable with China. And on the other hand, you use the word that's, I think, in many Americans' mind, fear. People seem to think the Chinese can do anything. they're producing more engineers, more scientists. They're taking over the world. Now, you've lived both in Japan and China. We used to think that about Japanese. They used to take over the world. But we've completely accepted Japan. Do you think because of China's size that Americans will have trouble accepting it?
This is, thank you very much for your kind words. This is, of course, a vast question. My short answer would be this. First, I thought there was more genuine reason to have economic concern about Japan than about China now. Japan was an already rich country whose corporations were head-to-head competitors for American corporations, Toshiba versus IBM, Toyota versus GM. China doesn't have any mature corporations like that. Its development has all been essentially in partnership with American or European investment, and so it's a very different sort of economic interaction. I think the fear of China was most intense when there was this sort of projected fear about America, and often, in our history, it's been projected to outside competitors. And there was that time that coincided with the Beijing Olympics and the financial crash that the United States seemed to have caused and China recovered from earlier, where both in China and the US there was a sense of China being omnipotent. I think the worst thing the Chinese government did was to have those opening ceremonies of the Olympic Games, which made the world think anything is possible for a billion unified people. And we were living in Beijing then, and we thought it's a miracle they pulled that off, because the rest of the Olympics was this giant chaos. The very next afternoon, I'll come back to the point, we had some friends who were in the rowing races for the Olympics. We were taking buses out to the rowing course, and nobody had figured out that the bicycle race course crossed the road where we went to the rowing course. And so for like 2 hours, the buses to the rowing course were impeded by the bicycle course. That was more typical of the Beijing Olympics than the opening ceremony, but it was a success. So I think that it's, I actually have a positive view here. As a journalist, I'm generally cynical, but it strikes me that most Chinese people who come to the U.S. have a good experience here and feel sort of enlarged in their personhood, and most Americans who go to China basically like it too. They find it horrifying in some ways, but they basically like it. And I think that these networks of connections will allow some kind of condominium between this large rising country and an established country. And I think that there's been surprisingly successful management of this relation over the last 30 years, and I think there is the possibility of a more or less harmonious interaction between the countries.
Can we take 2 more questions? No. I think yes, right? Nope, exactly.
Sorry,
yes.
With the universal goal to get rich is glorious, as well as the forced urbanization, what chance is there that the younger generation, particularly, I suppose, 50 and under, or younger than that, will have any remaining sense of the really valuable, fabulous history of the country over and above the religious values?
I mean, from what I see, the younger generation are very, very much Americanized, very westernized, and even back in the late 1990s, they knew American pop singers probably more than Chinese pop singers, and I don't think I see 2 trends. One is the younger generations are becoming young nationalists. They start to say, China is so good. We're going to go back to our history. America is not good. And on the other hand, I think there's also that, America is good, all the consumerism. So I think it's just a very complex thing as, you will have a certain percentage of young people who are going to be just like, very much Americanized or westernized, but then there are always, people, like the percentage of people in the generation, sooner or later, like you said, they would return to the roots and they would look for things they missed earlier on. So,
but also a lot of Chinese history is awful. Yeah. Like it's kind of like some really violent, and it's very colorful.
I love it.
Well, that's
could
what
go
makes
on
it
forever.
kind of like fantastic to read. But
and then that's why I don't think people want to learn about it, and they don't want to teach it because it's not a good history. But let's be honest, there are high school kids and people in their 20s here in this country who, like, Vietnam War, what's that? You know, I mean, people suffered during the Great Depression, what's that? I mean, they don't really know it, and they don't really internalize it. Or, you know, they may have heard of it, but it doesn't have any kind of impact on their lives. And so I don't think that China is any different than we are in that regard.
And I wonder if sometimes it's someone outside to appreciate it. Recently we're in Cairo in the Egyptian Museum, and it's in terrible shape. It's a wreck, and it's kind of like you go, oh my God, you know, these sarcophagi are here, and tourists are sitting and putting their drinks on them, and nobody's bothering with it. It was like the British and the French that really wanted to save these antiquities. So in a way, I mean, that might be something endemic to cultures. It takes someone from the outside to appreciate it.
Go ahead. One of the, I think to me, the most dangerous part of Chinese nationalism right now is just the uncontrolled hatred of Japan. That just is really, that is an actual danger. Yeah.
And also, I think that, again, goes along with, you know, recent history is not known in China. My generation, my mother's generation, we don't know our history. We know our history until, you know, 1900. From 1900 on, we did not learn. We know the history just was not taught in the way it happened. I'm sure it happens everywhere too, but I think that we don't trust our history in recent history. So,
and then there's the kind of blend of history and tradition, because it seems like the tradition is very strong still. History maybe not so strong, but everybody goes home to tomb sweeping and spring festivals and knows how to make dumplings and do that. You may like pop culture in America, but also really like and participate in that kind of culture and tradition of China.
Mm-hmm. I'm conscious that it's already past 6:30, so I think we need to wrap up. But if I can just follow this line of comment and link it back to the question about home. My day job, in addition to seminars, is as a political philosopher. And while I haven't been to China, I have spent time in India and then recently returned from rural Moldova, literally last week. And both of those countries seem to me to be places where this intersection of the passage to modernity and on the one hand, and then the striving for some kind of anchor in the past on the other, are very much at odds. And I think one of the things that's so interesting to me in the work and the writing that you all do, whether it's nonfiction or fiction, is that writing helps us wrestle with those fundamental questions of identity. And if that intersection of the past, the present, and the future is somehow essential for our continued development, not only as an American culture, but as a Chinese culture or as a global, emerging global culture, the kinds of things that you write about and the sensitivity that you bring to your work enriches us all. So thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. And I'm told there will now be book signings.
In the lobby.
So I take it that's in the lobby.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.